another program of the public interest. I am Malika Ramsey. This week's program, we focus on Emancipation Day. Of course, on the 1st of August, that's Thursday the 1st of August, Guyana, all Guyanese will celebrate and remember when our, some of us like to call them our foreparents came, and of course, like I said, it's Emancipation Day. With me to discuss is our very own historian, Mr. David Granger, who is the leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition. Good day and welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
Emancipation. What should emancipation mean for Guyanese, and not only Afro-Guyanese, but Guyanese as a whole? What should it mean?
Well, I regard it as the most, probably the single most important event in Guyanese history for several reasons. One, there were many antecedents, there were many factors leading to emancipation, and certainly the very act of emancipation, which of course is an act passed by the British Parliament, was a signal for the immigration of Portuguese indentured laborers, Indian indentured laborers, and in fact this year, 2013, Indians are celebrating the 175th anniversary of immigration, and the Africans are celebrating 175th anniversary of emancipation. So you could see the immigration of the Indians and the emancipation of the Africans almost coincided. And also the Chinese came as a result of emancipation, because it was assumed that after the Africans were emancipated, they would leave the plantation. This didn't happen, of course. Africans continued to work on the plantation, but it gave rise to several other developments. So I would regard emancipation as perhaps the single most significant event in Guyanese political history, entire history, because it was the occasion for the coming together of peoples of diverse ethnicities. And this is what produced the Guyanese society we have today, a society which is more or less a unified society, but made up of people of African, Indian, Chinese, Portuguese, Amerindian ancestry.
I am happy you said that, sir, because in Guyana, when we hear emancipation, most of us, especially me, we think about the things that we can wear to celebrate, to show that we're celebrating it. And sometimes I think that takes away from the historical background and the information that we need as to why we really celebrate emancipation. Do you believe that information on emancipation, where we came from in Guyana, is becoming extinct? And if you believe that the information is becoming extinct, how do we get that back? How do we get our young people to understand these are our cultures, this is where we came from, and this is how we got here?
There's abundant information about emancipation, actually. Perhaps it's not taught in schools. I myself had the experience of teaching Caribbean history at the CXC level and Guyanese history at the university level. And I would say that many university undergraduates arrived on campus not knowing much about Guyanese history, because at CXC level, the emphasis on West Indian history. So there might have been a deficiency in education, but there is a lot of information available. And I would feel that now we moved into the BlackBerry era, the video era, the movie era. Educators need to put the information in a form that young people would assimilate better, you know. It's no point giving a young person, 3 or 4 volumes of Guyanese history and say, read these and come back when you're finished, You come back in 5 minutes and say, look, I'm not going to read anything. But if you have movies, if you have videos, if you have songs about Guyanese emancipation, it would be more interesting. So I think that it's not a shortage or a deficiency of information. It is perhaps a failure to present that information in an acceptable form. But as I said in my opening remarks, it is a festival for all Guyanese. It's not an African festival as such, but it is a festival for all Guyanese, because I mentioned the proximity of the Indian immigration, and of course, so nowadays people don't pay much attention to the role that the Chinese and Portuguese played, but they played very important roles in our history, and certainly the Amerindian people have always been there. And I feel that 1st of August should be an occasion for the coming together of all of the peoples. And even though Africans have a prior claim to, because it is emancipation of the Africans, and it was a very significant event in their lives, because prior to emancipation, their lives were indescribably horrible. But still, we should regard it as a national festival, and a lot more, following the line you took, a lot more should be done to inform people about the significance of that event.
People were enslaved for, of course, after being briefed, for about 200 years. I mean, this is the response to this is probably obvious, but what would you say to people who are still probably holding on to this whole idea, my foreparents were slaves, and, you know, certain things we were entitled to, and that kind of attitude? What would you say to those people?
Well, there is some justification, because the era of enslavement, that 200 years in Guyana, was really a very horrible period, and you had thousands of people being brought here, and many of them died on the ships. And even when they came here, the average lifespan of an enslaved African was just about 12 years. There were no pictures of really old slaves. People died very young because they were worked to the bone, and it was only in the post-emancipation period we got really, you know, people living longer. But that period was one of struggle. There were several rebellions. The two best-known rebellions were 1763, and this year, in 2013, we celebrate the 250th anniversary of the 1763 rebellion. And it was also the 1823 rebellion that was well known. That was probably the largest rebellion in the country, and certainly in the English-speaking Caribbean. They had about 12,000 people were involved in that. And of course, in August, we'll be celebrating the 190th anniversary of that rebellion, because about 200 people, 200 enslaved Africans were killed. So it was a period of struggle, but it was also a period during which there were some stirrings in Europe for what is called the Enlightenment, and there were people on both sides of the Atlantic who were working to bring an end to enslavement. As you know, the village of Buxton is named after one of the persons, the abolitionists they were called, and they were able to bring about an evangelical movement. And a little over 200 years ago, the church, which we now know as the Congregational Church, was established in Guyana. And eventually some Africans were able to get education through the evangelism of the Congregational Church. In fact, in the darkest days, I would say it was only the Congregational Church that was present and standing up for the African people in the rural areas. And that is why you find now many of the Congregational churches are celebrating the 150th anniversary in Hope Town, in Den Amstel, in Anns Grove. And it was a complicated movement towards emancipation. But there was the evangelical movement, part of it, there was the Enlightenment movement, and of course, most of all, there was the struggle of the Africans themselves to be free of this bondage.
You mentioned 1763 monument. I want to touch on that a bit, but before I do that, how free are we? And when I say we, I mean Guyanese. I don't only mean Afro-Guyanese. How liberated are we after all the things that we would have gone through?
Well, when you look at the period of enslavement, Africans had no rights at all. I mean, they were treated as two-legged domestic animals. These are the words of Professor Alvin Thompson. Two-legged domestic animals. You know, I don't say that with any pleasure, but it is based on historical evidence that the way you treat a horse, Africans were property. Africans could be bought and sold, could be moved to estates. Children could be taken away. They were not allowed to marry. They couldn't give evidence. They could be punished. They could be executed. They had no rights at all, just as maybe your dog had no rights. So it is difficult to look with any sort of joy on that period. So when we speak of 1763, we speak about the struggle of African people to be free from that system. And that is why emancipation is so important. Because without emancipation, not only would not the other people have come, but life would be meaningless. So it is when Africans became free that several changes took place, and one of the most important changes was what they call the village movement. And that is when Africans were able to accumulate money from having a few chickens, growing provisions, and selling them in the village market. Even during the last period of slavery, which is called the apprenticeship, they were able to accumulate some money. In those days, paper money was not used among the poorer people. You had what they call specie, or real silver coins. So the coins had real value, and they would store these coins in the ground. And as early as 1839, they started to buy the old plantations to set up their own villages. So the Africans were responsible for the transformation of the Guyanese landscape, where you had just a string of plantations all along the coast and up the rivers. You now had villages with homes, villages with churches, villages with schools, villages with farms. So when the other ethnic groups were free of their indentureship or their contracts, because they didn't come as slaves, they had contracts, they were employees of the plantation owners, they were able to move into African villages which had some sort of structure. Village administration was in its early stages. They were places where people were living, people were producing food, and they were real communities of human beings.
So would you say that the experiences of being enslaved has somewhat contributed to us being able to embrace each other's cultures and ethnicity more? Did it contribute to that?
It was, emancipation was humanizing, because we mustn't forget that the Africans who came here were not slaves, they were free people. And they had values, and up to the present time, many of us, or many Africans, have retained some of those values. They've retained some of their words, they've retained some of their names. Names like Kofi and Afua and Kwame are authentic African names. Some of the food we eat, some of the food is authentic African food, like fufu. It's kenke, what we call kanki. It's or konki. Some anglicized words, people call it konki. These are genuine African foods, and some of the language we use, when we speak of sense fowl or something, these are real African words. So the Africans were not, brain dead. They were people with a culture. They came from advanced communities in West Africa. And after emancipation, they were able to recreate the societies with some of the values which they had embraced before. And those values were largely humanistic. They were, for the first time, they were able to recreate their families, because they were prevented from having families during enslavement. And many of the ceremonies they were able to preserve. The songs, some of the songs we've inherited, some of the expressions we use in idiomatic speech were preserved from our forefathers. Yeah. So these have influenced Guyanese culture tremendously. And to come back to what you said, yes, they were humanistic, because people of other ethnic groups were able to move into African communities. If you go to Plaisance now, you'd see people like the well-known lawyer Bernard de Sanders. He's a member of the Plaisance community. He didn't go there to live. His family grew up there. And many of the communities were mixed. Indians, in fact, even Boxer and Friendship, before the disturbances in the 1960s, they were mixed communities, and that exists up to the present time. In the villages which were bought by Africans, many of them have become mixed villages.
I want to touch on 1763 for a bit. You did mention, spoke about the anniversary of that being this year. Now, my question really is, why hasn't anything done? And it's coming off of Emancipation a bit. Since 1763 is such an important monument in our history, why hasn't anything done in terms of observing that important anniversary this year? And I'm asking too because some sections of the media, of course it wasn't widespread, would have complained that, you know, the 1763 monument seems to be neglected, that, you know, persons only go there when there's a big event, and people were complaining about the fact that it's not being upkept. Your thoughts?
Well, there have been several events to commemorate 250th anniversary. Perhaps the person who made the comment did not see them as being popular or widespread, but in all fairness, there have been several events. Maybe they have not been the way that other people would like to see them, but I know that earlier this year, because the event was in February, early this year, the government did have some of the events. I don't think that they were well known or well supported. And that is perhaps because the government runs things in a very exclusive manner, trying to keep certain people and certain organizations away. But there have been events. Several lectures were brought from the Caribbean, and they delivered lectures about emancipation. And I think there were a few other commemorative activities. As far as the monument is concerned, well, the government tends to neglect everything that, you know, doesn't seem to be profitable to the elite. If you look at the 1966 Independence Monument, you'd see that that's a mess. So there's really no emphasis on the government's part in preserving the culture of our country. Particularly the material culture, because there are monuments in several other communities. A lot of the African villages have monuments commemorating emancipation or commemorating the village purchase. You know, I can name about 20 or more villages with monuments, but the government doesn't seem to have an interest in that.
As we're on monuments, the topic of monuments, putting government aside, is there any way that we can, if not Emancipation Day of itself, come up with a day or a specific period when monuments across Guyana could be maintained, or some sort of event can, you know, be placed there to remind? And I think it would also help the young people to understand better what the various monuments signify.
The United Nations, what they call the UNESCO, the commission that deals with culture, does have a commemorative day for the preservation of monuments, for museums. There are several important days which United Nations observes, and maybe more should be done to bring to the attention of UNESCO. There is a National Commission for UNESCO, and more could be done by the villages themselves to maybe collaborate with the National Commission for UNESCO to preserve those monuments. I think that the villages must be a part of the responsibility for neglect of those monuments. I myself, when I visit villages, I would ask about a particular monument, and I can mention one particularly in the West Demerara, which I've asked to be preserved. And I'm now trying to do some research to find out the date of birth of the person to whom that monument was dedicated. But you need an organization which can promote the maintenance and the care of those monuments. And coming back to one of the earlier questions you asked, young people perhaps should be encouraged, particularly during August, to visit those monuments. For example, people do not know there's already an 1823 monument in Bachelor's Adventure. The revolt took place in Bachelor's Adventure. And I know that the government is going to open or declare open a monument next month, August, to commemorate the 1823 revolt. But there's already a monument. It's a poor monument that the villagers built. There are monuments, as I said, in Kildona and Union Village, in Litchfield, in Amstel, in Stewartville, in Friendship. But I think the villagers, too, have to call attention to these monuments. They themselves have to have events or festivals to celebrate the events which the monuments represent, and seek means of preserving those monuments.
Finally, before I come off of monuments, and yes, I'm happy that you chuckled there, because this question might be a little of a provocative one. Any thoughts or any comments on the bulldozer that has been parked at the 1763 monument?
Comments.
No comments. All right, we can move on then. How does David Granger celebrate emancipation or observe it?
At present, I respond to invitations from villagers to go into those communities and speak with them and join with the villagers. I have a long-standing commitment to the celebration that is held in the National Park in Georgetown, but I have to visit other communities, and I try to cut myself in little pieces and go to many places possible, because it's only one day. So from midnight, I am on the go until midnight on the 1st. So I try as far as possible to be with villagers. There are some religious events I attend as well, and I think they understand that I have to go other places. So I spend a limited period of time, but there are religious and community events which I have to attend.
Do you believe that we do enough to celebrate not only the day, but the period? And here I'm talking based on the fact that there are no labor laws, labor rights, culture, the whole idea of independence. Do we do enough to celebrate it?
Emancipation, yes, we do a lot. I remember when I was younger, it was much more hearty, because it was, I would say, next to Christmas, it's probably the most important celebration in the lives of African villagers. Well, in rural areas, of course. I suppose as people have become more urbanized and they have pursued other celebrations, other festivals, the actual folksy atmosphere has diminished. For example, there used to be dancing and libations and, celebrations, singing of songs, and in villages like Hopetown, drumming. These used to be a very important part of the celebration. Of course, eating traditional foods like metemji, people call it metaji, it was really metemji, fufu and kanki and other foods, and of course drinking mabi and that type of thing. It used to be fun, in which the whole community was involved, the young and the old. But I would say over the last 50 years, there's been a slow decline, and this might be because of migration, it might be because of the villages are mixed and you don't have homogeneous communities anymore. I don't know the reason, but there are communities still which observe emancipation in a major way. From what I've discovered, there's been a shift towards having presentations such as lectures explaining historical events and mixing that with the cultural events. So I would say it is still a healthy celebration, and some villages where the populations are small would group with bigger villages. And this is typical, of course. When you speak about Buxton, for example, you're talking about Buxton and Friendship. When you're speaking with Ansgrove, you're talking about Ansgrove and two friends, Similarly, in the West Demerara, you have, Hague, Blankenberg, and Denham, several villages come together to celebrate the event.
Even though it's still a healthy celebration, just to use your own word, can we do anything at all to somehow stop the decline?
I wouldn't call it a decline. Well, maybe I might have made an error in using that word, because it is still strongly felt among some people. But perhaps if there's a decline at all, it's not widely felt. As I said, part of the problem, if I can call it a problem, is communication. We need to use media which get that message across, because we can't go under the mango tree and beat drums anymore. People want a more sophisticated form of entertainment. It was entertainment. And that could be done through movies, DVDs, it could be done through plays, through poetry. I think that is what needs to be done. Sometimes we have even fashion shows, sometimes we have drumming competitions, song competitions. We need to put those things in the forefront for our emancipation celebration. And I think some of the young people will be more attracted to go back. But right now, they don't want to do kwekwe, they don't want to do drumming, they want to do something that is perhaps more culturally relevant to the types of lives that they live now and the aspirations that they have. But it's all there. It's just a matter of repackaging it and putting it through a medium that they understand. That medium usually is a visual medium, through film and song. And perhaps enough has not been done. But I know that there are books, there are materials which could be used. I would like to say at this point in time that a few years ago, Mr. Sherwood Lowe, a member of our party, did actually produce a documentary on 1763. It's the first documentary on 1763 I've seen. It was based to some extent on drawings, but there was a narrative and there was a book, a small book written by Professor Thompson, and he was able to bring those three together: the voice, the visual images, and the facts. And he produced a film in 1763. So it's possible, because he's a geologist by profession, but he was able to produce something of tremendous historical value. And if more of that were done, I think we can preserve the festival and at the same time educate the rest of the nation about the importance and significance of emancipation.
All right. Finally, sir, in about 60 seconds, what are the wishes of David Granger, the People's National Congress Reform, and the Partnership for National Unity for the people of Guyana as we celebrate another Emancipation Day?
First of all, it's one of education. I hope that, and I will continue to work for the wider dissemination of information of emancipation, that it's a truly national festival. I would say it was the birth of the Guyanese nation. Regardless of the ethnicity of Guyanese, I think they should appreciate that our birthday, our national birthday, is the 1st of August. The second thing is the appreciation of the cultures of other people, because it was the event or the occasion in which people of different ethnicities came together. But Guyana has become a more inclusive society, although there are forces pulling that society apart. Exclusive, I think Guyana should become more inclusive. So people of Amerindian, Indian, African, Portuguese, Chinese, European descent must appreciate what happened on the 1st of August. That's my wish.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of, opposition leader, that is, Mr. David Granger. This has been another program of the public interest. I am Malaika Ramsey, hoping that you have a safe emancipation. Until next time, thank you very much for watching.